As we begin our study of ancient Rome, it's very important that we look at the geography of Italy first. As you'll notice, I have drawn a map. Italy on a map looks like a boot. It is in the shape of a boot. Now remember, social studies teacher, not an art teacher. So, as we look at this, we see that Italy is actually a peninsula in the Mediterranean Sea. A peninsula is a piece of land surrounded on three sides by water. Some of that water includes the Adriatic Sea, the Ionian Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Tyrrhenian Sea. As you look at Italy, it's important to notice two big mountain ranges. First is the Alps to the north. The Alps are a huge mountain range that actually provide a natural border between Italy and the rest of Europe. Then you have the Apennine Mountains that run north to south along Italy. We will be talking about Rome specifically. Rome is right here on the map. It is very close to the Tiber River. Okay? As you look at this map, it's also important for you to notice that Africa is over here. There is a city called Carthage in Africa that we're going to talk a lot about when we get to the Punic Wars. Rome was built along the Tiber River. The Tiber River could be used for transportation, fresh water, and trade. Rome was built on 7 hills. These hills provided protection from invaders. Historians know little about the first people of Italy. Between 2000 BC and 1000 BC, a group of people, including the Latins, settled in the plains and hills of Italy. The Latins settled on what would be Rome's hills. Later, in 650 BC, the Etruscans conquered Rome. The Etruscan kings expanded and developed the city of Rome. They taught the Romans how to build temples, streets, and public squares. In 509 BC, the Romans rebelled and actually drove out the Etruscans. The Roman Republic. In 509 BC, the Romans set up the Republic. A republic is a type of government in which citizens elect their leaders. That should sound very familiar. Okay, that's what we do in the United States. We got that idea from the Romans. During the Republic, the army became very strong. Every man who owned land had to join the army. By 276 BC, the Romans had conquered and were ruling all of the Italian peninsula. The Romans thought of a better way to organize their army. That's how they became so strong. Instead of one large group of soldiers moving as one, the generals divided their army into legions. Legions were groups of about 6,000 men. These men were then broken into smaller groups, which could move more quickly in battle. That helped them become very successful in war. Governing Rome. There were 2 main social classes in Rome. The patricians were wealthy landowners who held government office, and the plebeians, who were shopkeepers, artisans, and farmers. Most people in Rome were a part of the plebeian class. All patrician and plebeian men were citizens and had the right to vote. They had to pay taxes and join the army. However, it's very important you remember this, only patricians could hold government office. As we look at the Roman Republic, it's important to know the different parts of the government. There are actually 4 different parts. So if we look at this chart, here are the 4 different parts. The first part are consuls. These were 2 men who served 1-year terms. One of the men became head of the military. The other man was head of the government. Then you had what was called the Senate, or a governing body. These were 300 men. They made laws, they advised the consul, and they planned buildings. Once you became a senator, you were seen as a senator for life. Then you had another governing body called the Assembly of Centuries. These men also made laws, but they also elected the consuls and praetors. Now, praetors were judges. So they were the people who interpreted the laws, and they also had the responsibility of leading armies as well. Okay? Again, one thing you have to remember, only patrician men could serve in the Roman Republic. So plebeian men were not represented in government. Eventually, the plebeians got mad because they were not a part of the government. So they went on strike. The patricians, fearing that the Republic was going to collapse, allowed the plebeians to set up what was called the Council of Plebes. This council would elect what was called tribunes, or people who told the government what the plebeians thought about different issues. The plebeians also demanded that all the Roman laws be written down for everyone to see. Therefore, Rome adopted its first written laws known as the 12 Tables. These Basically, 12 laws were written and inscribed in bronze and put up around the city. These laws were based on the idea that all citizens should be treated equally under the law. The Punic Wars. As the Republic continued to grow, so did Rome. Rome wanted to control all of the Mediterranean world. But so did another empire in Africa known as Carthage. Therefore, Rome and Carthage eventually went to war. There were 3 Punic Wars. The first Punic War is where Rome built fleets of ships and eventually defeated the Carthaginians after 20 years of fighting. The most famous Punic War is probably the Second Punic War. The Second Punic War is famous because of the Carthaginian general named Hannibal. He made a very historic crossing of the Alps to attack Rome from the north. It's so famous because he is said to have crossed these mountains with elephants in his army. Carthage eventually was conquered by the Romans and forced to give up their navy and their Spanish territory to the Romans. Carthage was no longer a military power after the Second Punic War, but it was still a rich trading center. During the Third Punic War, Roman soldiers burned Carthage to the ground, because they were afraid of them getting stronger. Many Carthaginians were enslaved by the Romans during this Third Punic War. The rise of Julius Caesar. By 60 BC, 3 men emerged as the most powerful men in Rome. They were Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar. These men first formed what was called the First Triumvirate. A triumvirate is a political partnership of 3 people. However, Crassus eventually died in battle. The senators then began to think that Julius Caesar had too much power or was becoming too popular, so they ordered him to give up his army. Caesar refused to give up his army, and he actually then marched his army into Rome and took total control of the city and then total control of Italy. In 44 BC, Caesar made himself dictator for life. He then filled the Senate with people who only supported him. So this is very different. Rome was a republic, and now Julius Caesar has come in and say, you know what, forget the republic, I'm going to be dictator for life here. Caesar's supporters thought that he was a strong leader and provided Rome with peace. However, Caesar's enemies thought that he wanted to be king and began plotting against him. On March 15th, in 44 BC, Caesar was stabbed to death by a group of senators led by Marcus Brutus. March 15th is known as the Ides of March. After Caesar was killed, civil war broke out in Rome, meaning people began fighting each other in the city. So Romans began fighting Romans. Eventually, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, rose to power. Octavian, or Rome's first emperor. Under Octavian's leadership, Rome changed from a republic to an empire. An empire is a government that includes many people and lands under a single rule. Octavian became Rome's first empire, and he actually changed his name to Augustus, which means honored one. Augustus's rule marks the beginning of what we call the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana was 200 years of peace in Rome. This was a time where many of the structures that are now in Rome that we see, like the Colosseum and different things in the Forum, were built. Okay? Augustus' rule also reshaped Rome. For example, he divided the Roman Empire into what was called provinces. So Roman Empire was so big, he broke it into smaller pieces where he would then appoint a proconsul or a governor to take care of that different or smaller piece of the Roman Empire. He changed tax laws, and he created a set of laws for free men who were not citizens. Augustus ruled for about 40 years. He died in 14 AD, and the Roman Empire continued to grow after Augustus' death. Now, it's very important to remember there are a lot of different emperors after Augustus, and we will talk all about those in class. But Augustus was, you have to remember, is Rome's first emperor. Rome's decline. During the 200s, or 200 AD, the power of Rome declined because of a weakened government, a failing economy, and invasions from Germanic groups. Emperors Diocletian and Constantine tried to reform the empire by dividing it into half, into the western half and into the eastern half. Constantine moved the capital of the eastern half of the Roman Empire to the city of Byzantium. He then renamed the city Constantinople. Constantinople is actually, today, Istanbul, which is in Turkey. Over the next several hundred years, Germanic invaders, specifically the Vandals and the Visigoths, gained control of the western half of Rome. The eastern half of the empire, where Constantinople was, thrived and actually turned into the Byzantine Empire. Rome had a lasting impact on the modern world. Today, Rome still influences law, government, art, architecture, language, and religion.